Hello and welcome to Larry Has Opinions. You guys probably know by now that I don't really do TBRs because I can't really stick to a strict reading plan. However, I do share my MBR from time to time, which is a list of books that I might or might not be asked to read in the next few months. Let's get started. First of all, I have a few classics because I tend to prefer modern literature in general. And so I end up always pushing these aside, but I want to get around to picking up some of these I've been neglecting for so long. The first one I have is Rebecca, and I don't know very much about the story and the plot of this book. However, I do know that I keep seeing it popping up in so many different channels and always with glowing reviews, 4 stars and 5 stars everywhere. And then fate sent me a sign the other day because I tend to check one of those free library boxes that you see on the road. There's one near my house and I never ever find anything remotely interesting. And then the other day I just got this, which is pretty amazing, and it's a good hardback edition, and I thought, this is meant to be. Now I have to pick this up. Moving on, I want to make an effort to read at least a handful of books in French every year. And this year, I haven't read any. My big plan was to read The Count of Monte Cristo in French, but I have to say that I gave up very quickly because the language was a bit too dense and difficult for me when I started, so I ended up reading it in Italian. But for my French project, I've decided to try at least to pick up The Outsider or L'étranger by Camus. And I've seen the good pay talk about Camus quite a lot, and I've been curious about this book for a while, and I really want to try and get around to this. And this probably has one of the best opening lines ever, so I really want to see if I can squeeze this in before the end of the year. I also have Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf, and this is one of those that I'm probably very likely to read because I've agreed to buddy read it with the good Shelley. So again, I don't know too much about the story. I know it's a stream of consciousness, and I think it all takes place in one single day. I hope it's not too tough to get through because I've heard mixed reviews, but fingers crossed. And the reason I've decided to read Mrs. Dalloway is also because I want to read The Hours by Michael Cunningham. And again, this is going to be a buddy read with Shelley. So I know that The Hours has some part of the story that heavily relies or leans on Mrs. Dalloway. I don't exactly know in which terms, but I got strongly recommended that I should read Mrs. Dalloway first and The Hours second. I remember watching the movie of The Hours, but I have no idea what happens in it. My mind is completely blank. I just remember Nicole Kidman in it, I think. But that's the extent of it. Next, I have No One Is Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood, even though everyone seems to be talking about this book. And this made the Women's Prize shortlist as well as the Booker Prize longlist. So there must be something about this book that, makes it worth reading. Initially, I thought it sounded really gimmicky. It's all about social media and meme culture and that sort of really on-trend sort of book. And I thought it's not my type of book. I'm just going to give it a pass. And then the more I heard about it, the more I thought I should give it a go. It's also a pretty short book. And then I'm just blaming Bob the Bookerer because he's the one who really convinced me to read it. And the next book I'm also going to blame on Bob. He convinced me to read Unsettled Ground by Claire Fuller. Again, I don't know too much about it. I know it's about the story of two twins in very difficult circumstances. I think one of them can't read or write, something like that. A pretty grim story, and I'm all in for grim stories, so fingers crossed that this is going to be a good one. And when it comes to historical fiction, one that I'm definitely going to read is The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco. Aside from my French project, I also want to make an effort to read more Italian books. I read the Count of Monte Cristo in Italian, but that's not really Italian literature. This is definitely one of the modern classics of Italian literature, and we've agreed to buddy read it with a small group here in September. I'm probably going to have started it by the time I publish this video. So I know it's about a group of monks investigating some sort of mischief in the Middle Ages. So it sounds good. I don't know. It's probably going to be quite dense, but... And then I will have to finish the Wolfold trilogy with The Mirror and the Light by Hilary Mantel. I read the first 2 installments earlier this year, and if you're not familiar with it, it's all set around the Tudor era with Henry VIII and all his wives, and it's all told from the perspective of Thomas Cromwell. I've really liked the first two books, even though I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of Mantel's writing style. But I'll definitely want to finish the trilogy, and I'm not entirely sure when, but hopefully before the end of the year. We'll see. Another one that I'm definitely going to read is Harlem Shuffle by Colson Whitehead. And that's because I have an arc from the publisher. This is coming out in a couple of weeks, so you should expect to see my review before the official publishing date. I've never read anything by Whitehead before, and that's why I'm quite looking forward to this, because I know his other books are very popular. They won prizes, and a lot of people seem to keep them in very high esteem. I know the story is all set in Harlem in the 50s, and there's some kind of heist. So it's a bit of a thrillery historical fiction sort of book, so we'll see how it goes. I'm also hoping to get around to reading Misery by Stephen King. This is one of his most popular books, so it doesn't really need a lot of introduction, but it's one I've never read. And I know the premise sounds really interesting, and I remember Katie Bates in that iconic role, so I'm definitely hoping that I might enjoy this as well. A writer I've never read anything by is Riley Sager, and he's just about to publish Survive the Night, which I think is all set in the 80s or something like that. And I know he's a very popular writer in the thriller community, and I'm really curious to see which side of the argument I'm going to land in, because he's also seemed to be a pretty controversial one where some people really, really love his books and some other people just seem to really loathe them. So I'm curious to see where I stand. Another upcoming release that I'm hoping to get an advanced copy for is Never by Ken Follett. I've read several of Follett's historical fiction books, and I've always enjoyed them very much, but I haven't read any of his older thriller books. And this very much goes back to his earlier tradition of those thrillers that made him famous in the first place. This sounds like it's going to be a geopolitical sort of thriller vibe, so it sounds something that potentially I should really, really enjoy. I've mentioned The Left Hand of Darkness recently a few times in my channel, so I really want to read more by Ursula K. Le Guin. And one that has come up very recently on my radar is the word for world is forest, which I hadn't really heard before, but I saw Brittany reading it, and she said she liked it even more than The Left Hand of Darkness. And the most appealing aspect of the book is that it's only 150 pages or so. So again, this sounds like a great addition to my MBR. And still for science fiction, another one that I really want to read is The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. I've heard so many glowing reviews for this one, and I know it's quite literary and heavy on the themes, which makes it really, really appealing. Unfortunately, the fact that it's a trilogy and it's such a big commitment might make it slip a bit further down the road, but I'll see. I mean, if I'm in the mood, hopefully I can pick this one up as well. And another one that keeps getting kicked down the road because of my commitment issues is Hyperion by Dan Simmons. I know this is even a quartet, I think, rather than a trilogy, so it's definitely like a chunky one, but I keep hearing really good things about it. It seems closer to the older tradition of sci-fi, but also quite heavy on the themes and on the literary side of things. So fingers crossed that I'll get around to this as well. When it comes to fantasy, one that I even put in my 5-star prediction video is Tigana by Guy Gabriel Kay. And I know this is about medieval city-state, that sort of vibes, and this is a standalone, which really helps. I know that this can be slightly polarizing, but again, I've seen a lot of good reviews. My friend Klaus rated it something like 6 stars out of 5, something silly like he does. So I'm hoping to pick this one up maybe in November, we'll see. And then I have Earthlings by Sayaka Murata. This is probably more magical realism than epic fantasy, but I really like Convenience Store Woman by the same author, even though that's just straight literary fiction with no magical element. But I quite liked her writing style. And this one sounds like it's touching on some of the same themes, but it's also very dark and disturbing. So it sounds just straight up my alley. And lastly, I have The Sword of Kaigen. And this is a self-published fantasy book. And again, it's really good that it's a standalone, so it makes it easier for me psychologically to pick it up. It's fairly popular on booktube. I've seen it a few times, and typically with very, very good reviews. But if you look at Goodreads, it doesn't seem to have that many ratings, so it's probably not that popular in the wider world. And I know this has an Eastern flavor to fantasy, which is going to be a good, nice break from the more typical Western medieval fantasy setting. I hope you guys like this video. Please give me a thumbs up. If you want to join our Discord to tell me more about your favorite books, or maybe you have any thoughts about these books that I've just mentioned, please leave a comment down below. And I'll see you the next time.